One reason thousands more games were published for the Amiga in comparison to the consoles emerging from the same era is that there were far fewer barriers to entry. Producing software for the Amiga didn't demand investment in a development kit or payment of royalties to Commodore per unit sold. For better or worse, developers were free to produce as many copies of their games as they believed would sell, and there were no quality assurance assessments to contend with. In contrast, Sega and Nintendo would insist on handling the entire cartridge and paraphernalia manufacturing process for Genesis and Super Nintendo games, whilst imposing a minimum initial production run of 30,000 units. Each cartridge would cost publishers between $16 and $30, $10 to $12 of which would constitute the license fee levied for permission to develop for the host platform. Even if a publisher had the capacity to produce more than 3 titles per year, they would be prohibited from doing so in an effort to assert quality control measures. A strategy that wasn't always entirely successful, despite those supercilious seal of quality claims. None of these complications swayed Amiga game development. That is until the dawn of the underwhelming A500 CD-based reiteration known as the CD-TV. At this point in 1991, Commodore introduced a development kit, copyright protection mechanism and license fee for each CD produced for the system. You'd imagine this might have buoyed Commodore's floundering cash flow situation, except at 25 cents apiece, such Amiga tax was never going to bankroll the next major evolution in computer technology Commodore fans craved. This being Commodore, management were habitually slow to catch on. It wasn't until May 1993 when they increased their license fee to $3 per CD, representing a seemingly extortionate 1,200% rise in one fell swoop, albeit still falling well short of the typical royalties charged by Sega and Nintendo. By this juncture, the ill-conceived CD-TV was dead in the water, so the maneuver was instead likely made in preparation for the CD-32's upcoming release and Commodore's predicted adoption of CD media in general. This could explain why CD-32 games tended to cost more than their Amiga floppy-based counterparts. At least where titles that weren't simply repackaged shovelware are concerned. With no additional enhancements to sweeten the deal, these full-priced affairs were no more than scurrilous swindles. Quite possibly, inflated license fees also had a bearing on publishers' decision to support the platform at all. With piracy now temporarily restricted to negligible levels, it's tricky to determine whether developing for the Amiga CD32 or cartridge-oriented consoles would be the more lucrative option. Whilst cartridge prices would exceed those of CD32 discs by £10 to £20, forfeiting such a substantial cut to Sega or Nintendo may well have rendered any revenue benefits null and void. Platform-dependent development costs and volume of sales would surely have dictated the bottom line. In the absence of solid financial analysis, all we really know for certain is that prior to 1991 there was an unchallenged assumption amongst publishers and hobbyists that computer game development was an anything-goes Wild West rodeo. Flipping that model on its head overnight through the imposition of fiscal and technological caveats would have drastically disrupted the flow of software from programmer to consumer, as well as impacting the relationship between publishers and platform taskmasters, Commodore. Of course, as hindsight informs us, Commodore had more pressing terminal catastrophes looming on the horizon. By mid-1994 they'd be declared deceased. Ironically, mammoth license fees Commodore owed to third parties would be the ultimate nail in their coffin.